Let's do it. How hard is it to be a modern man? We're often talking about initiatives to further gender equality for women, equal pay, representation in politics and in boardrooms, objectification in the media. But are men and boys getting forgotten about? Are we at risk of alienating young men by focusing all of this empowerment chat on women and girls? We want to hear your experiences of where men and boys get a bit of a raw deal. 0500 909 693 is the phone number, and you can text us as well, 85058. We would love to hear from you. Do come on the programme at BBC5 Live on social media.
So here's a comment from the back of the book that we've been talking about today, Inside Man. When it comes to gender issues, women have problems while men are problems. If one of the questions thrown up by the book, Pioneering Stories About Men and Boys, which is out this week, journalist Dan Bell is one of the editors of the book and of the online magazine Inside Man as well. The book invites discussion about whether men are the invisible gender, whether there is a crisis of masculinity and there's an objectification of men going on. Dan joins us now on 5 Live. Good afternoon.
Hi, Dan.
Hello, Sarah and Dan. Thank you very much for having me on. It's great.
Pleasure. Well, it's got people going this already today.
I'm sure it has.
We've got Norma in Cumbria saying women have been socially disadvantaged for centuries. Now it's men's turn, so just tough it out, she says. One other one to read, men's role. Until we feel we can't leave home without painting our faces, gluing on artificial eyelashes and elevating our shoes several inches, men will always be in a sounder mental condition than women.
Men used to do that too, though, didn't they? Wigs and powder and all of that.
Don't pretend men are facing a crisis to make your pitiful selves feel better. Oh, feminist BBC, says another. So, Dan, the challenges for the modern man, what are they? What's happening?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that, really this book is about opening a conversation. It's not against all of the many issues that need to be addressed for women, ongoing issues, but it's just saying that there are also issues that men experience, and some inequalities hit women hardest, some inequalities hit men hardest. I mean, just to sort of on the top of my head, 90% of the homeless or rough sleepers are men, 78% of suicides are men, about 30% more young women are applying to university than boys are at the moment. And I think it's okay to have a conversation about all of these things, and we're just trying to create a more vibrant and diverse conversation about equalities, essentially.
One of the things that kind of worried me a bit, and I wonder how much you believe this yourself, Dan, you said that a lot of the articles in the book are from people who focus on men's problems, because you say conversations about gender that include men usually perpetuate the myth that women have problems and men are problems. Is that how you think society views men?
I don't think there's one way that society views men, but I do think that when it comes to talking about gender issues, that tends to be the tenor of the conversation. It tends to be looking at the problems men cause rather than also exploring, and it's important to look at the problems men cause, but it's also important to look at the problems men have as well, I think.
Yeah, you've also included, or said that the other people that you've spoken to predominantly are men, obviously, makes sense,
yep.
And non-feminists. Are you kind of reinforcing the them and us thing a little bit? That was kind of what I was worried about.
Really are trying to sort of strike new ground in this whole conversation, actually. I mean, you're absolutely right. It is a very polarised discussion at the moment, culturally. And I just think it's, the kind of the mainstream conversation about gender in newspaper columnists, etc., tends to be had from a feminist perspective, which is, of course, valuable and important. But I think there is room for men to talk about the issues that face them as men without having to be in reference to feminism all the time.
Do you think that men now get objectified in the same way that we frequently complain in the past and to this day about women being objectified?
I wouldn't say it's the same, but I think there is, just also to point out, this is a collection of articles, and we've deliberately tried to be incredibly diverse in perspectives and opinions and experiences that are expressed in the book. So that's one. I think you're probably talking about the article by Mark Simpson, who's a fantastic writer who actually coined the term metrosexual. He was at our wonderful launch debate on Friday, and he comes from a really interesting perspective. He's quite kind of welcoming of the idea that men can start to sort of enjoy being gazed upon rather than, if you like, being the gazers, and he sees that quite a positive development for masculinity. And I think there is an appetite to have a different kind of a conversation about men and boys, and it's quite a fledgling conversation, and quite often it'll be, people have strong views about these things, obviously.
Shane Ryan is one of the writers featured in the new book Inside Man, pioneering stories about men and boys. He's the chief executive of the charity Working with Men. Thanks for being with us, Shane.
Hi.
So you work with socially or economically disadvantaged men and boys, trying to encourage them to make a positive contribution both to their future and to their community. Why did you decide to focus on young men? What made you think that they needed help?
I think it's obvious when you look at the statistics in school and also in our society that men and boys particularly from certain backgrounds, are suffering. And so the idea of our work is to look at the transition points in their lives when they're most likely to need help and often support they're not getting currently.
And do you think that young men in some ways are being demonised at the moment?
It's difficult. See, I don't want to get into the whole debate of bleating about men and boys, and I just like to deal with the facts. And if you look at what's happening, for instance, in our capital, in London, young men are most likely to be victims of violent crime. In schools, you have young men that are failing educationally. And so they're the issues that I kind of really focus on, and we focus on as an organisation. So what we do is we look at everything from birth right the way through to about 25 at the moment, and all the times, particularly times of transition, so between primary and secondary school, getting a job, having a baby, the kind of times that the support that men generally need, and that we're finding need more and more in the 21st century, isn't really there, and we try to fill those gaps.
It's interesting that you talk about violent crime. There are men most likely to be the victims of violent crime, but aren't they also far more likely to be the perpetrators of violent crime?
Yes, indeed. I think that and it's a self-perpetuating cycle, because the other side of that is that the young men are constantly told they need to take care of themselves. And so it creates this real adversarial nature between young men. We have postcode wars and other bits and pieces happening. And so young men feel they need to go out and protect themselves. They feel they need to be tooled up, and they need to be ready for whatever's going to happen outside. And a lot of these young men are effectively boys. They're children. And they're almost socialised to be adults way before their time. And I think that's one of the problems. And in the article I was writing for the book, what I was talking about is just us treating children as children and not turning them into adults at 12.
Shane's going to stay with us. We've also got the journalist Dan Bell, who is one of the editors of the book and the online magazine Inside Man as well. 85058 is how you can get in contact with us on the text. Loads coming in. Chris, thanks for giving us a call on Five Live. Chris, what's your point? What do you want to say today?
I think there was a really interesting point from Shane just a few minutes ago there, talking about young men coming through education. And it seems interesting to me that for the last 10 years, we've been talking about girls doing better and better in education, but we haven't tackled the problem of young men doing worse and worse in education.
Chris,
and we need to get on top of that.
Chris, can I ask how old you are?
I'm 41.
Okay, and do you feel that if you were to go for a job with a woman of the same age, that your career prospects would be viewed more negatively than hers?
I think it would be significantly challenging for me, yes. Yeah. Would it be more negative? I'm not sure. I guess it would depend on the employer and where they were at the time. But I think that there's a more than likely chance that I would struggle against a woman these days.
Positive discrimination is an issue, basically, Chris, yeah?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. I think some organisations are doing it very consciously, positive discrimination, but others are, I think it's more of an unconscious thing, but it's a social acceptability.
It's very interesting.
For instance, we want to deal with the public sector, who are very much focused on 50-50, so we need to be seen to be 50-50 as well in terms of what we're doing.
Chris, thanks very much for getting in touch with us. 85058 or 0500 909 693 if you want to ring us directly. I've spoken to teachers in the past who have said a similar thing, particularly primary school teachers. A man I know is a primary school teacher and has said, if he was to go up against a woman in a job with similar qualifications, she would get the job every time. Let's bring back some of our guests on this. Dan Bell, who's the author, or the editor rather, of Inside Man. What do you think about some of the things you've been hearing, Dan, there?
I don't think all men are getting a raw deal by any stretch of the imagination, but I wouldn't want to comment on things like positive discrimination. I don't have the facts to hand. But there are areas, such as the ones that I mentioned earlier on, where there is a clear, the inequality is hitting men and boys hardest, such as homelessness, such as suicide, such as educational performance. And I think it should be okay to address those kinds of issues and see them in gender terms, without being seen to be opposing arguments for equality for women.
Shane?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I mean, I think for too long, what's happened is we set up this kind of adversarial issue when it comes to rights. And the idea is just that I think what we're trying to do through our work, particularly, I know that Dan's an advocate of this, is just saying it's not, why do we have to go there every time we discuss, for instance, whether boys aren't doing well in school? Why do we have to judge that against girls' performance? We just have to look at it for what it is and deal with it. You know, I think that as a whole, patriarchy damages young men as much as it helps them. You know, so, and I think that's true in most areas, and I think that a lot of it is compounded, particularly by issues of race, also, and by socio-economic circumstance. That we're trying to move towards a time when, for instance, men can express themselves for who they are, and not based on a group of age-old stereotypes and social constructs. And I think women the same. That's what women want. Women want equality. They want to be judged on the content of the character and their own intellect, and not just on gender. You know, I just think that's basically the crux of all of the discussions on the book for me. The fact that you cannot judge people just on their gender, and I think that's the more important issue here, and the one with the debate we're trying to keep open.
Yeah, I mean, can I just chip in there at that point? Essentially, one of the things that's so exciting about this book, and it really is the diversity of the stories that are in it. I mean, just to give you a quick rundown, we've got a piece by Dr. John Hastie, who suffers from a condition called Duchenne muscular dystrophy, which is a muscle wasting condition, and he talks about the difficulty of achieving kind of traditional ideals of masculinity when you're a disabled man. We've got a piece by Robin Fox, who talks about he's a gay Methodist minister. He talks about reconciling his faith with his sexuality. We've got a wonderful piece by a father called Al Ferguson, who talks about the father's experience of loss of a child through miscarriage, his wife's miscarriage. And these are really heart-rending, poignant, powerful, and diverse stories. And what I get out of it when I read that, you get quite close to a work like this, and reading it back, I'm just frankly in awe of the diversity of it. And I think that's one of the things for me as a journalist. I wouldn't want to speak for any of these individuals, but for me as a journalist, I want to get more stories out there. I want to show there's the massive diversity and richness and vibrancy of masculinity.
Shane, do you think, men and boys, are we in a time where they are less able to cope than they were, or are they just talking about it?
I don't think that they're less able to cope than they were. I think that life is changing. Just following on from what Shawnee was saying there, if you look at the Office of National Statistics, the recent statistics, you'll see that there are nearly 250,000 stay-at-home dads. And that's a massive shift. If you look at 1993, for instance, there were less than half that amount. So the world is changing, and our ideas just have to change with them. And we have to, there are lots of different ways to be male. And part of what we're doing is showing our young men that it's okay to embrace that. Because a lot of areas of society are still showing that it's not. Boys will be okay, don't talk about your feelings, all these kind of things. And we're trying to move them away from that, and we just need to move our young people towards a slightly more nuanced version of what manhood can be, and move them away from, as I say, these social constructs.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wouldn't be sitting here in this studio talking to you today were it not for my husband, who looks after our son every day of the week, and he goes to the play park every day with Theo, and he's pretty much the only man there. And fair play to him, it's incredible that he does it, but I know that the odd time he thinks to himself, I'm the only man here.
Yeah, exactly.
Gents, I want to give you about 20 or so seconds to summarise where you think we'll be 10 years down the line. I just want to read a couple of texts out because people are really getting engaged in this afternoon. Hi, I work in young mental health service and wanted to make the point that young women experiencing mental distress are far more likely than young men to express this in ways that get them appropriate help and support, like self-harm or tears. Conversely and tragically, says Pete, many more young men externalise their distress in violent behaviour, which leads them into completely inappropriate criminal justice system. Dan, thank you. Shane, Shawnee, sorry we've run out of time, but great to have you on this afternoon. And thanks to our callers and everyone who's got involved on the text this afternoon.